My parents demanded I sell my house to bail out my golden child brother. Now they're shocked I bought their foreclosed home at auction instead. Hey beautiful people. Your support means everything to us. Help us reach our next big milestone by hitting that subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss an amazing video. Let's dive in. Blood is thicker than water, they say, but what happens when that bloodline demands you sacrifice everything? I learned the hard way when my parents decided my hard-earned house was nothing more than collateral to bail out their golden child, Alex. They thought I'd sell my future for his mistakes, but now they're the ones stunned as I hold the deed to the house they lost. Growing up, it was always Alex who shone brightest in their eyes. Where I was told to be practical, Alex was allowed to dream. Where I was taught to work hard, he was handed everything on a silver platter. I remember birthdays where his cake was bigger, his gifts shinier. The family dinners where his stories were applauded, while mine were met with silence or a dismissive nod. And when I worked 2 jobs to put myself through college, scraping by on ramen noodles and secondhand textbooks, Alex lived rent-free at home, driving a car my parents bought for him. I should have seen this coming. When my phone rang that Tuesday morning, I almost didn't pick it up. I was in the middle of organizing my bookshelves, a task I found oddly therapeutic after a long week. The name Mom flashing on the screen brought a familiar pang of unease, the kind that years of strained family relationships had conditioned me to feel. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Her voice, as sharp as ever, greeted me. We need to talk, sweetheart. It's about Alex. There it was. The magic word. Alex. I didn't even bother hiding the exasperation in my tone. What's he done now? A heavy sigh came through the line, as though I'd failed some invisible test of familial loyalty. He's gotten himself into a bit of a situation. It's complicated, but your father and I need your help. Of course you do, I muttered under my breath. What kind of help? There was a pause, and I could almost hear her rehearsing her words. My mother was always calculated, especially when she wanted something. We need money, she said finally. Alex's business partner betrayed him, and now he owes a lot of money. The kind of money your father and I can't cover on our own. My stomach turned. This wasn't the first time Alex had gotten himself into trouble. Failed businesses, bad investments, shady schemes, it was a pattern. And every time my parents were there to bail him out. And what does that have to do with me? I asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear her say it. We were thinking, she said cautiously, that you could sell your house. It would cover most of what he owes, and it's not like you can't buy another one eventually. You've always been resourceful. I laughed. I actually laughed, though it was more bitter than amused. You want me to sell my house? The house I worked my ass off to buy? For Alex? Don't be so dramatic, she snapped. This is family, and family helps each other. You don't have a family of your own to worry about. It's not like you're married or have kids. You could stay with us for a while until you get back on your feet. I was stunned into silence, but my mind was racing. Family helps each other. Funny how that only seemed to apply when Alex needed something. When I needed help, they were full of excuses. You're young. You'll figure it out. We've got our hands full with Alex right now. The double standard was glaring, and now they wanted me to sacrifice the one thing I'd earned entirely on my own? I can't believe you're even asking me this, I said finally. Do you hear how ridiculous this sounds? Ridiculous? Her voice rose, the practiced sweetness giving way to irritation. What's ridiculous is how selfish you're being. Alex is your brother. He's blood. Do you really think we should just let him fail? Yes, I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. If that's what it takes for him to learn, then yes. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. For a moment I thought she might hang up. But instead she hit me with the one thing she knew would hurt. I don't know what's happened to you, she said coldly. You've changed? I laughed again, though this time it was humorless. Yeah, I have. I've changed because I've had to. I've spent my whole life watching you bend over backward for Alex while I was left to figure everything out on my own. And now you want me to throw away everything I've worked for to save him from his own mistakes? No, not this time. Your father will want to talk to you about this, she said stiffly, her tone dripping with disappointment. Good luck with that, I said, hanging up before she could respond. That conversation played on repeat in my head for the rest of the day. I'd always known where I stood in the family hierarchy, but this was a new low. They weren't just asking for money, they were asking me to erase years of struggle and sacrifice. And for what? So Alex could continue to live without consequences? The next few weeks were quiet. Too quiet. No calls, no texts. I should have felt relieved, but instead I was angry. Angry at their audacity, angry at myself for still caring what they thought. The silence was their weapon, a way to make me feel guilty, to make me question my decision. But I didn't cave. I couldn't. When the phone finally rang again, it was my father. His voice was calm, almost too calm, and I knew he was about to deliver the same message my mother had. He tried to frame it differently, talking about family values and how your mother and I raised you to care about your brother. I let him talk, let him lay the guilt on thick, but my answer didn't change. "I'm sorry," I said firmly. "But I can't do this." "Can't or won't?" he asked, his voice hardening. "Does it matter?" I shot back. "The answer is no." He sighed, a long, weary sound that I recognized all too well. It was the sound he used when he was done arguing, when he wanted to let you know you disappointed him. But for the first time, I didn't care. That night, as I sat in my living room, staring at the walls of the home I'd built for myself, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, but also a deep, unwavering sense of resolve. This was my life, my future. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my own family, take that away from me. For the first time in years, I felt free. The days following that phone call with my father were eerily quiet. No texts. No missed calls. Nothing. It was like I'd been erased from the family ledger, written out of the story they'd crafted, where Alex was the hero and I was the reliable but unremarkable supporting character. But their silence, instead of filling me with guilt or regret, cemented my resolve. They were punishing me in the only way they knew how, through emotional distance. What they didn't understand was that I'd lived most of my life on the outskirts of their affection. Their approval wasn't something I'd grown up expecting, and now, it certainly wasn't something I was going to beg for. A week later, my resolve was put to the test. My father showed up at my house unannounced, his weathered face stern, and his shoulders squared in that way that always preceded one of his lectures. I opened the door reluctantly, already bracing for what was to come. "Can we talk?" he asked, stepping past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door slowly, my stomach knotting. "What's there to talk about?" I already said no. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the couch like it was his house. It was such a small thing, but it infuriated me. Still, I bit my tongue and sat, watching him pace the room. He started his speech carefully, the way someone might handle a fragile object. "Your mother and I raised you better than this. Family always comes first. That's what we taught you. And now, when your brother needs you most, you're turning your back on him." I let him talk, the words washing over me like a wave I'd already braced for. Guilt, duty, family, they were all weapons in his arsenal, and he wielded them expertly. But this time they didn't land. When he paused, waiting for my response, I met his gaze calmly. "Family always comes first, huh? Funny, I don't remember that rule applying when I needed help. When I was working 3 jobs in college, where was that family first mentality? When I asked for a small loan to help with my down payment, why was it suddenly, 'We can't afford that, but we'll pray for you'? Where was it then?" He flinched just slightly but recovered quickly. "That's not fair. You know your brother has always needed more support." "More support?" I laughed bitterly. "He's needed more excuses, more handouts, and more chances, and you've given him all of it. But not this time. I'm not selling my house to clean up his mess." "Don't do this," he said, his tone softening. "You're better than this. You're not like Alex, chasing money and cutting people off when it's inconvenient. You've got a good heart. And I'm keeping it that way by saying no," I said firmly. "If you're here to guilt me into changing my mind, you're wasting your time." He stared at me, his jaw tightening, and I knew he was weighing his next move. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. "You'll regret this." It wasn't a threat, it was a declaration, as if he genuinely believed I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Without another word, he walked out, leaving the door open behind him. I didn't bother closing it until I saw his car pull out of the driveway. That was the last time I saw my father in person for months. My mother didn't call, didn't text. Even Alex, who'd never been shy about his entitlement, didn't bother reaching out. The silence should have been a relief, but instead, it gnawed at me. It wasn't regret. I didn't for a second doubt my decision, but there was a heaviness in knowing that standing up for myself had come at such a cost. Still, life went on. I threw myself into my work, spent more time with friends, and started a few small home improvement projects. My house, the one they'd asked me to give up, became my sanctuary. Every brushstroke of paint, every new piece of furniture, felt like a quiet rebellion, a way of claiming my independence. Then, one evening, just as I was starting to feel like the storm had passed, my neighbor Susan knocked on my door. Susan was the kind of person who knew everything about everyone in the neighborhood, and she loved to share. "You won't believe what I just heard," she said, practically vibrating with excitement. I raised an eyebrow. What's going on? It's about your parents' house, she said, lowering her voice as if someone might be eavesdropping. Apparently it's going into foreclosure. They've been behind on payments for months. I froze. Foreclosure? Are you sure? Oh, I'm sure, she said, nodding eagerly. My friend works for the bank handling it. The auction's in a few weeks. I closed the door on Susan's chatter, my mind racing. Foreclosure. The word hung in the air, heavy and surreal. My parents had always been so proud of that house, always careful to project an image of stability and success. Losing it would shatter everything they'd built their identity around. A part of me felt vindicated. After all, this was the inevitable result of their constant coddling of Alex. But another part of me, one I didn't like to acknowledge, felt a twinge of guilt. As much as they'd hurt me, they were still my parents. And despite everything, some small, buried part of me wanted their approval. For days I couldn't stop thinking about it. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friends, but the knowledge gnawed at me. It wasn't my fault their house was being foreclosed. It wasn't my responsibility to fix it. And yet, the thought of them losing the home they'd poured so much of their lives into wouldn't leave me alone. When I finally decided to go to the auction, it wasn't out of spite, or so I told myself. I just wanted to see what would happen. I wasn't planning to bid. I just wanted closure. Or at least that's what I thought. The day of the auction arrived and I wasn't sure what I was expecting to feel. Closure, perhaps? Maybe even some small sense of justice? But as I parked my car outside the courthouse where the auction was taking place, a mix of emotions churned inside me. Anticipation, guilt, and a nagging sense of unease I couldn't quite shake. The courthouse steps were bustling with activity. People milled about, some chatting quietly, others scanning papers or glancing at their phones. Most were here for business, seasoned buyers looking for investment opportunities. To them, this was just another property to flip or rent. But to me, it was so much more than that. I found a spot near the back of the crowd, trying to blend in. The auctioneer stood at the front, a small podium in front of him, flanked by two assistants holding clipboards. They ran through the list of properties up for sale that day, rattling off addresses and starting bids with practiced efficiency. My parents' house wasn't the first on the list, but it wasn't far down either. When they finally announced it, my chest tightened. Next on the docket, the auctioneer said, his voice booming through the small speaker system. A single-family home located at 824 Willow Lane. Starting bid, $250,000? I swallowed hard, my heart pounding as the bidding began. The numbers climbed quickly, $215,000, $275,000, $300,000. The bidders were faceless strangers, their voices sharp and decisive, cutting through the air like knives. Each bid felt like a punch, a reminder of everything my parents were about to lose. I told myself I was here to observe, to get closure, but as the bids escalated, something shifted inside me. I thought about all the memories tied to that house, the good and the bad. The Christmas morning spent opening presents by the fireplace. The endless fights with Alex in the cramped hallway. My father teaching me how to ride a bike in the driveway. My mother scolding me for tracking mud on her pristine carpets. That house had been a battleground, yes, but it had also been a home. My home. $315,000, someone called out, breaking my train of thought. The auctioneer nodded. We have $350,000. Do I hear $375,000? A hand shot up. $375,000. My pulse quickened. This was it. The point of no return. If I let this moment pass, the house would be gone, sold to someone who'd gut it, remodel it, and erase every trace of the life that had been lived there. It wasn't my responsibility to save it. I knew that. But in that moment, it didn't feel like a choice. It felt like something I had to do. Before I could second-guess myself, I raised my hand. $400,000. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. The auctioneer's eyes flicked to me, his practiced smile widening. We have $400,000. Do I hear $425,000? For a moment, no one spoke. The bidders, who'd been so aggressive just moments ago, hesitated. I could see them sizing me up, trying to gauge if I was serious. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last. $425,000, someone finally called out. I didn't flinch. $415,000. The auctioneer's voice rose with excitement. We have $450,000. Do I hear $475,000? Another pause. The crowd shifted, murmuring among themselves. The other bidders were beginning to waver, their interest fading. The house wasn't worth this much to them, not as an investment. But to me it was priceless. When no one else spoke up, the auctioneer raised his gavel. Going once, going twice, sold. To the bidder in the back for $450,000. The sound of the gavel hitting the podium was deafening. My heart was racing, my hands clammy. I just bought my parents' house. The rest of the process was a blur. I signed the necessary paperwork, handed over the deposit, and listened as the auction staff explained the next steps. But I wasn't really paying attention. My mind was spinning, replaying the moment I raised my hand over and over again. As I walked back to my car, the reality of what I'd done started to sink in. I hadn't planned for this. I didn't even know if I could afford it. But deep down, I knew it was the right decision. That house represented so much more than bricks and mortar. It was a symbol of everything I'd endured, everything I'd overcome. And now it was mine. The following day, I received a call from the auction company confirming the sale and providing instructions for transferring the title. They mentioned that the previous owners, my parents, had been informed of the outcome. My stomach tightened at the thought. I knew it was only a matter of time before they reached out. Sure enough, my phone rang later that afternoon. It was my mother. Her voice, usually so composed, was shaky and uncertain. I heard you bought the house, she said, skipping the usual pleasantries. Yes, I said simply. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, could picture her sitting at the kitchen table, twisting the phone cord around her fingers like she used to when I was a kid. Why? She asked finally. Why would you do this? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Because I could. That's not an answer, she said, her voice rising. Do you have any idea what this means for us? Where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed to do? Her words hit me like a blow, but I didn't falter. You're asking me what you're supposed to do? After everything? After you asked me to sell my house for Alex and then cut me off when I refused? You want me to feel bad for you now? She was silent. For once, she didn't have a retort, no clever excuse or justification. And in that silence, I felt a strange sense of power, a power I'd never had before. I bought the house, I said finally. What happens next is up to you. My mother didn't call back after that. Not that I expected her to. She always avoided confrontation when the situation didn't bend in her favor. But the silence didn't last long. 2 days later, my father showed up at my door, his expression hard and unreadable. It was early morning, the kind of hour he'd never bothered me at before. I hadn't even had my coffee yet when the knock echoed through the house. I opened the door, still in my pajamas, and his cold, assessing eyes met mine. He didn't waste any time on greetings. We need to talk. Do we? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Because I think we said everything that needed to be said. You bought the house, he said flatly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He wasn't carrying the weight of guilt or regret, just anger. Why would you do that? What were you thinking? I shut the door and crossed my arms, meeting his accusatory tone with one of my own. I was thinking it was a good investment. Isn't that what you've always told Alex? To invest wisely? This isn't the same, he snapped, his voice rising. This isn't about business. This is about family. I laughed, though it came out more bitter than amused. You only seem to care about family when it's convenient for you. Where was that concern when you demanded I sell my house to bail out Alex? Or when you cut me off because I said no? His face reddened, the lines around his mouth tightening. We did what we had to do. Alex needed help. He's your brother? And I needed a family that treated me like more than a backup plan, I interrupted, my voice firm. You made your choices, Dad. Now I'm making mine. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression shifting between frustration and something that almost looked like shame. But before he could say anything else, there was a knock at the door. I frowned, glancing at him before opening it. Alex stood on the other side, his usual cocky grin replaced by something more strained. He looked me up and down, his eyes narrowing. So it's true. You bought the house. What gave it away? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. The fact that my name is on the deed? Funny, he said, brushing past me to join our father inside. You must think you're real clever, huh? Buying it out from under us like that? I didn't buy it out from under anyone, I said calmly. It was a public auction. If you cared so much, maybe you should have shown up and bid for it yourself. Alex scoffed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. This isn't about me. This is about you proving some kind of point. You've always had a chip on your shoulder, acting like you're better than the rest of us. Better? I repeated, my voice rising. I don't think I'm better, Alex. But I am done letting you and mom and dad treat me like I'm less. I worked hard for everything I have, while you've been handed chance after chance, and you still find ways to screw it all up. That's enough, my father said sharply, his tone commanding in a way that once might have silenced me. But not anymore. No, I said, turning to face him. It's not enough. You want to talk about family? Let's talk about how I've spent my whole life cleaning up your messes, sacrificing for your golden boy and getting nothing in return. You asked me to sell my house to bail him out, and when I said no, you cut me out of your lives. And now you're standing here, acting like I owe you an explanation for buying the house that you couldn't even keep. The words hung heavy in the air, the silence between us thick with tension. My father's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Alex shifted uncomfortably, for once unable to find a clever retort. Finally my father spoke, his voice low and controlled. We're still your parents and this is still your brother. Whatever you think we've done wrong, it doesn't change that. You're right, I said, my voice steady. It doesn't change that. But it also doesn't change the fact that I'm done being the one who's always expected to sacrifice. You made your choices. Now you can live with them. They left shortly after that, their frustration palpable but their arguments exhausted. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, the weight of the confrontation settling heavily on my shoulders. It wasn't easy standing my ground. A part of me wanted to let go of the anger, to find some way to make peace. But every time I considered it, I thought about the years of neglect, the countless sacrifices they demanded of me without a second thought. This was my line in the sand and I wasn't going to cross it. A few days later I visited the house. My house. It still felt strange to call it that, but as I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, a sense of ownership began to take root. The walls were bare, the furniture gone, but the memories lingered, like ghosts refusing to move on. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The living room where we'd celebrated birthdays. The kitchen where my mother used to cook elaborate meals for Alex's friends, while I was left to fend for myself. The staircase where I'd sat as a teenager, listening to my parents argue about how to fix Alex's latest mistake. Each room told a story and not all of them were happy. But as I stood in the master bedroom, looking out at the backyard where my father had built a swing set when I was 6, I realized something. This house wasn't just a reminder of the pain. It was also a symbol of resilience, of survival. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. This house was mine now. And for the first time in a long time, so was my life. I stood in the empty house for a long time, absorbing the weight of what had just unfolded in the last few weeks. The walls, though stripped bare of furniture, still whispered the echoes of arguments, celebrations, and countless unspoken grievances. Owning this house now felt like holding a mirror to the past, one that reflected all the cracks and fractures in my family's relationships. It didn't take long for the confrontation I'd been dreading to arrive. The call came a few days after my visit to the house. My mother, her voice sharper than ever, demanded that we sit down as a family to talk about the situation. She made it sound as if this was a minor misunderstanding, something we could smooth over with a few heartfelt words and some forced apologies. Still, I agreed to meet, curious about what they would say now that the power dynamic had shifted. We arranged to meet at a nearby coffee shop, a neutral ground, though I doubted neutrality had anything to do with my parents' intentions. When I arrived, Alex and my parents were already seated at a table in the corner. Alex looked annoyed, arms crossed, while my parents sat with stiff postures, their expressions carefully neutral. They didn't look up as I approached, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of unease. But then I remembered, I was here on my terms, not theirs. Let's get this over with, I said as I slid into the chair across from them. My mother started first, her tone clipped but restrained. We're all adults here. There's no reason for this to escalate further. We just want to understand why you felt the need to go behind our backs like this. Go behind your backs? I repeated, my voice calm but laced with disbelief. You lost the house because of Alex's mistakes and I bought it at a public auction. That's hardly going behind your backs. It's the principle of the thing, my father interjected, his voice low and stern. You didn't even tell us you were bidding. Do you have any idea how humiliating this has been for us? Our friends, our neighbors, they all know what's happened. And whose fault is that? I shot back, my tone sharper now. You prioritized Alex's needs over your own financial stability, and now you're upset that it blew up in your faces? Alex finally spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. You're loving this, aren't you? Sitting there all smug thinking you've won? I turned to him, narrowing my eyes. This isn't about winning, Alex. This is about survival. I did what I had to do to protect myself because no one else in this family ever cared enough to do it for me. You don't get it, Alex said, leaning forward. You've always been jealous. That's what this is really about. You couldn't handle the fact that I was the one Mom and Dad cared about more, so you're taking it out on us now. The words stung, not because they were true, but because they revealed just how deeply Alex's sense of entitlement was ingrained. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before responding. You're right about one thing, Alex, I said slowly. Mom and Dad did care about you more. They gave you everything: money, support, second chances, while I had to fight for every scrap of independence I've earned. But this isn't jealousy. It's reality. And maybe it's time you faced it? My mother shifted uncomfortably, her carefully composed facade beginning to crack. This isn't helping anyone, she said, her voice wavering. We need to find a way to move forward as a family. I agree, I said, surprising them all. But moving forward doesn't mean pretending none of this happened. It means setting boundaries. It means acknowledging that I am not responsible for fixing Alex's messes or for bailing you out of the consequences of your own choices. We're your parents, my father said, his voice rising. We sacrificed for you, for this family. How can you stand there and act like we haven't done enough? I met his gaze, unflinching. You did sacrifice, Dad. But not for me. Everything you sacrificed, every decision you made was for Alex. And now you're reaping what you've sown. The tension at the table was suffocating. My parents exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of anger and something else, something that almost looked like regret. Alex, on the other hand, looked ready to explode. So what? Alex said, throwing up his hands. You're just going to kick them out of the house and leave them homeless? Is that the plan? I shook my head. I haven't decided yet. But if they do stay, it'll be on my terms. Not yours. The conversation ended there, the weight of my words lingering in the air as I stood to leave. I walked out of the coffee shop feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and empowerment. For the first time, I had made myself heard, and there was no mistaking the message. I wasn't going to be their scapegoat anymore. The days that followed were quiet. My parents didn't reach out, and Alex, predictably, disappeared back into whatever hole he crawled out of when he wasn't demanding something from them, or me. I began to think that maybe, just maybe, I had finally carved out some semblance of peace. But peace wasn't the same as closure. As much as I wanted to move on, the confrontation at the coffee shop had opened old wounds, wounds I wasn't sure how to heal. I spent hours wandering through my parents' now empty house, trying to reconcile the memories it held with the reality of our fractured family. Each step felt like a confrontation in itself, a confrontation with the past, with the choices that had brought me here, and with the person I had become in the process. The quiet didn't last long. It never did with my family. Just when I thought I might get some space to breathe, Alex showed up at my new house unannounced. I should have expected it, really. He wasn't the type to let things go, especially when he felt like he'd been wronged. Still, seeing him standing at my door, wearing that smug, entitled look he'd perfected over the years, set my teeth on edge. What do you want, Alex? I asked, not bothering to hide my irritation. He leaned casually against the doorframe, arms crossed. We need to talk. About what? I asked, folding my arms. Because if this is another attempt to guilt me into handing the house back, you're wasting your time. He chuckled, the sound low and mocking. Relax, I'm not here to beg. I just think you've been unfair about all of this. I raised an eyebrow. Unfair? Really? You mean unfair like asking me to sell my house to bail you out? Or unfair like being the one who always gets left behind while you get chance after chance? He waved a hand dismissively, as if my grievances were nothing more than petty complaints. Look, I know you've got this whole victim complex going on, but this isn't just about you. Mom and Dad are struggling right now. You could help them if you wanted to. But instead, you're holding on to this house like it's some kind of trophy. I felt my blood boil at his words, but I forced myself to stay calm. You don't get it, do you, Alex? This isn't about the house. It's about finally standing up for myself after years of being treated like I don't matter. He smirked, shaking his head. You think this makes you strong? Holding on to some petty grudge? All it does is make you look small. I stared at him, my jaw tightening. What small is coming here, uninvited, and trying to make me feel bad for protecting what's mine? Now, unless you've got something productive to say, I think we're done here. But as I moved to close the door, his hand shot out, stopping it. Wait, he said, his tone softening. Look, I know I've messed up. I know Mom and Dad aren't perfect. But they're still our parents. Don't you think they deserve a second chance? I hesitated, his words cutting deeper than I cared to admit. Part of me wanted to believe that things could be different, that my parents could change, that Alex could finally take responsibility for his actions. But the other part, the part that had been burned too many times, knew better. "I'll think about it," I said finally, though my tone made it clear that I wasn't making any promises. He stepped back, a flicker of something that might have been regret crossing his face. "That's all I'm asking." After Alex left, I found myself pacing the empty living room, my thoughts racing. I didn't trust him, how could I? But his words stirred something in me, a tiny seed of doubt that refused to be ignored. Was I being too harsh? Was there a way to fix things without sacrificing my own happiness? I spent the next few days avoiding my phone, needing time to think. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. A letter arrived in the mail, addressed to me but written in my mother's neat, looping script. Inside was a handwritten note, simple but heavy with emotion. "We know we've made mistakes. We know we've hurt you. But we're still your parents and we love you. Please come home. Let's talk." I read it over and over, trying to decipher the truth behind the words. Was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation? Or just another ploy to get what they wanted? The decision weighed on me for days. Finally, I decided to visit them, not to forgive, not to forget, but to get some closure. I drove to the small apartment they were renting, a far cry from the house they'd lost. The sight of it, cramped, shabby, and entirely unlike the home they once took so much pride in, hit me harder than I expected. When they opened the door, their faces were a mixture of surprise and relief. My mother stepped forward, reaching out as if to hug me, but I stopped her with a raised hand. "I'm not here to fight," I said, my voice steady. "I just want to understand." "What? Why did you think it was okay to ask me to give up everything for Alex?" My father cleared his throat, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. We thought we were doing the right thing. We thought you'd understand that sometimes family means making sacrifices." "Sacrifices," I repeated, my tone bitter. Funny how those sacrifices were always mine to make. "We were wrong," my mother said, her voice breaking. "We see that now. We didn't know how to stop. We didn't know how to say no to him." Her honesty caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind them of every slight, every moment of neglect. But another part, one I hadn't even realized was there, just felt tired. "You need to figure out how to say no," I said finally. "Not for me but for yourselves. Because if you don't, this cycle will never end." They nodded, their expressions a mix of shame and understanding. And for the first time I felt like they were truly listening. The visit didn't fix everything, it couldn't. But it was a start. As I drove home, I realized that revenge wasn't what I wanted anymore. What I wanted was peace. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally on the path to finding it. The drive back from my parents' new apartment was quieter than usual. No music, no distractions, just the sound of the tires humming against the asphalt and the endless loop of thoughts in my head. Their apology, as surprising as it was, didn't erase the years of hurt, the blatant favoritism, or the sacrifices they had expected me to make. But it had planted something else, a fragile seed of understanding. I pulled into the driveway of my new house, their old house, and sat there for a while, staring at the familiar facade. It still didn't feel like mine, even though the title and deed said otherwise. It was hard to look at those walls without seeing the memories etched into them, the arguments, the laughter, the disappointments. Yet, for all its weight, the house also represented something I hadn't had growing up: control. For the first time, I had the power to decide what stayed and what went, not just within these walls but in my life. Stepping inside, the silence was deafening. The rooms were still mostly empty, but I'd begun to make small changes. A fresh coat of paint in the kitchen, new fixtures in the bathroom, a modern light fixture in the dining room. These small acts of renovation felt symbolic, as though I were erasing the parts of the past that hurt and replacing them with pieces of my own story. I wandered through the house, running my hand along the walls as memories surfaced. In the living room, I could still see my father standing by the fireplace, lecturing me about responsibility while Alex lounged on the couch, smirking. In the kitchen, my mother scolded me for not being more like my brother. On the staircase, teenage me sat quietly after one of those fights, wondering why I always seemed to fall short in their eyes. But now the house was quiet and those voices were gone. In their absence, I realized something important. The power they once held over me had diminished. It wasn't that the pain had disappeared, it hadn't. But the anger and resentment no longer felt as suffocating. Owning this house, walking through these rooms on my terms, felt like reclaiming something I'd lost long ago. The next few weeks were filled with transformation. I threw myself into renovating the house, tackling one project at a time. It wasn't just about making the space my own, It was about proving to myself that I could rebuild, that I didn't need anyone else to define what my life looked like. I sanded floors, painted walls, and even learned how to install shelving. Each nail I hammered into place felt like a tiny victory, a small but meaningful step toward reclaiming my independence. Friends started to visit, drawn in by my newfound energy and the promise of home-cooked meals in a space that slowly but surely was becoming a home. "It's amazing what you've done with the place," my best friend Rachel said one evening, her voice tinged with admiration. "It doesn't even feel like the same house." "That's the point," I replied, smiling. "I'm making it mine." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "And your parents, Alex? Have they been back?" I shook my head, though I knew it was only a matter of time. "No. But I think I've set my boundaries clearly enough. They know where I stand." And then, one rainy afternoon, I got the call. My father. I hesitated before answering, my thumb hovering over the screen. When I finally picked up, his voice sounded quieter, more subdued than I'd ever heard it. "Hi," he said. "I was just calling to see how you're doing." It was such a simple question, but coming from him, it felt monumental. For years, every interaction with my parents had been about Alex, about their needs, about what they wanted from me. To hear him ask about me without an ulterior motive caught me off guard. "I'm good," I said cautiously. "How about you?" "We're managing," he said. "Your mother's adjusting to the apartment. It's smaller than we're used to, but we're making it work." I could hear the weight in his words, the unspoken acknowledgement of everything they'd lost. Not just the house, but the illusion of control they'd clung to for so long. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The bitterness that had fueled so many of our conversations wasn't there anymore, but neither was the closeness I'd once craved. "I'm glad to hear that," I said finally. "Really?" There was a pause, and then he said something I never expected. "We're proud of you, you know. For everything you've done. For standing your ground." The words hit me like a wave, washing over years of hurt and resentment. I didn't know if I believed them, not entirely, but I appreciated the effort it took for him to say them. "Thanks, Dad," I said softly. "That means a lot." After we hung up, I sat on the couch for a long time, staring out the window as the rain drizzled against the glass. The house felt warmer now, less like a battleground and more like a refuge. I realized that while revenge had initially driven my decisions, it wasn't what sustained me. What kept me going was the desire to heal, to grow, to build a life that wasn't defined by the wounds of my past. One evening, as I sat in the living room surrounded by half-empty paint cans and fabric swatches, I found myself thinking about my family, not with anger but with a strange kind of clarity. They weren't perfect. They'd hurt me in ways that might never fully heal. But they were human, flawed, and struggling in their own ways. And while I couldn't change the past, I could choose how much of it I carried with me. Looking around at the space I'd transformed, I realized something else. This house wasn't just a symbol of everything I'd endured. It was also a testament to everything I'd overcome. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The house finally felt like home. The walls, once bare and heavy with the weight of the past, were now adorned with bright, personal touches. A photo collage of my travels, paintings I'd picked up from local artists, and shelves lined with books that had seen me through some of the darkest times. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a reflection of me, of my journey, of everything I'd built despite the odds. But as much as I wanted to put the past behind me, life has a way of circling back to unfinished business. It was a Sunday afternoon when I crossed paths with my parents again. I hadn't planned on seeing them, but fate, or perhaps just the smallness of the world, had other ideas. I was in the grocery store, debating between two brands of coffee, when I heard my mother's voice behind me. "Oh," she said, startled, her hands gripping the handle of her shopping cart. My father stood beside her, holding a list and looking equally surprised. They both looked older, more tired, as if the past few months had weighed on them in ways I couldn't imagine. "Hi," I said, forcing a small smile. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did we," my father said, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. There was an awkward pause, the kind that only happens when too much history hangs in the air. Finally, my mother broke the silence. "You look good," she said, her voice soft. "Happy?" "I am," I replied. "How are you two doing?" "We're managing," she said, echoing the same words my father had used on the phone weeks ago. "The apartment is small, but it's enough for us." "And Alex?" I asked, surprised by how calm I sounded. "He's figuring things out," my father said, a hint of frustration in his voice. "Still looking for steady work, but he'll get there." I nodded, unsure of what to say. Alex had always been the golden child, the one they'd pinned all their hopes on. Hearing the resignation in my father's voice felt strange, almost surreal. "Well," I said, shifting my basket from one hand to the other, "I hope things work out for him." Another pause. My mother fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve, her eyes downcast. "We were thinking," she began hesitantly, "that maybe we could come by sometime. To see the house." Her words caught me off guard. I wasn't sure what I'd expected from this encounter, but it wasn't that. For a moment I didn't know how to respond. The house had become my sanctuary, my safe space. Letting them back in felt like opening a door I'd worked so hard to close. But then I saw the way she looked at me, hopeful, vulnerable, and for the first time truly humbled. It wasn't an attempt to manipulate or guilt me. It was a genuine request, one that came from a place of regret. "Maybe," I said carefully. "We'll see." They both nodded, accepting my answer without argument. It was a small moment, but it felt significant, like the first crack in a wall that had stood between us for too long. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the fireplace as the flames danced and flickered. My mind replayed the conversation over and over, dissecting every word, every expression. I thought about my parents, about Alex, about the tangled web of love and resentment that bound us together. For so long, I'd been consumed by anger, by the need to prove myself, to reclaim what I felt I'd lost. But now, sitting in the home that was finally mine, I realized something important. I didn't need their validation anymore. My strength, my worth, didn't come from their approval or lack of it. It came from within, from everything I'd endured and overcome. And while I couldn't erase the past, I could choose how much of it I carried forward. A few weeks later, I decided to invite my parents over. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the right one. I wasn't doing it for them, I was doing it for me. To show them the life I'd built, the person I'd become, not out of spite or revenge but out of a desire to finally move forward. They arrived on a sunny afternoon, their expressions a mix of awe and trepidation as they stepped inside. My mother's eyes scanned the living room, lingering on the new furniture, the fresh paint, the small but meaningful touches that made the space mine. "You've done a beautiful job," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "Thanks," I said simply. "It's been a lot of work, but it's worth it." My father nodded, his gaze lingering on the family photos I'd chosen to display. Some were new, snapshots of friends and adventures, but a few were old. A reminder that, for all the pain, there had been good moments too. We spent the afternoon talking, the conversation light and tentative. There were no apologies, no grand reconciliations, but there was a sense of understanding, of walls slowly coming down. For the first time in years, it felt like we were seeing each other clearly, not as adversaries but as people, flawed and trying in our own ways. As they left, my mother turned to me, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she said, "for letting us see this. For letting us see you." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "Take care," I said, watching as they walked down the driveway and disappeared around the corner. That night, as I stood in the kitchen sipping a cup of tea, I felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. The house, once a symbol of everything I'd lost, had become a place of healing. And while there was still work to be done, both within these walls and within myself, I knew I was on the right path. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward. And it felt good.
I had spent years working toward this moment. Every late night hunched over my laptop, every sacrifice I made, every rejection I endured, it had all led to this. And now, finally, the offer letter sat in my hands, a tangible proof that my dreams were coming true. My heart raced with excitement as I reread the words for the 100th time. The position was everything I had ever wanted, a step toward independence, toward something bigger than the life I had settled for. I practically ran through the front door, eager to share the news with Jason. I had rehearsed this moment in my head so many times. His proud smile, his congratulations, maybe even a celebratory dinner. I imagined him wrapping his arms around me and telling me how proud he was, how he always knew I would achieve something great. But reality was a cruel storyteller. Jason sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, his expression unreadable. I held up the letter, beaming. "I got the job," I said, expecting excitement, maybe even a hint of admiration. Instead, he barely looked up. "What job?" I blinked, my excitement faltering. "The one I interviewed for last month. The company I told you about. The one I..." "Before we begin, imagine watching everything you worked for go up in flames, burned by the very person who was supposed to stand beside you. This is a story of loss, resilience, and the ultimate revenge. If you believe in justice, in taking back your power, and in stories that leave you breathless, then hit subscribe." It's free and together we'll dive into tales that prove no one gets away with betrayal forever. Now let's begin. Jason snatched the paper from my hands before I could finish. His eyes flicked across the page, his face unreadable. For a moment I thought maybe he was just processing the news. But then without a word he stood up, walked over to the kitchen and held the letter over the stove. My heart stopped. Jason, what are you doing? My voice was shrill, my pulse pounding in my ears. He met my eyes and a slow smirk curled his lips. I'm the owner of this house and your husband. I'll do whatever I want. You stay home, cook and clean. Then he let the paper fall into the flames. I lunged forward, but it was too late. The edges curled, blackened, and in seconds my dream was nothing but ash. For a long moment I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The sheer shock of what had just happened rooted me in place. My throat tightened, my breath shallow. My voice cracked. You burned it. Jason shrugged like it was nothing. You don't need a job. I provide everything for you. You should be grateful. Grateful. The word twisted in my gut like a knife. This wasn't just about a job. This was about control. About power. Jason had never wanted me to succeed, he had wanted me to stay small, to depend on him, to never have the ability to walk away. I stared at him, a man I once thought I loved, and saw him for what he truly was. But I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't scream. Instead, I swallowed the rage that burned in my chest and forced a slow breath. If he thought he could break me, if he thought this was the end of my dreams, he was wrong. Very, very wrong. Jason smirked, as if expecting me to crumble, to fall into his arms and apologize for even daring to want more. I met his gaze, my lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. You're right, I said softly. His eyes flickered with satisfaction. Of course I am. Now how about you make us some dinner? I turned toward the kitchen, my fingers trembling, not with fear but with something far colder. Far more dangerous. I would make him dinner. I would smile. I would play the role he expected of me. And then I would burn everything he loved to the ground. He thought he was in control. He had no idea what I was about to do. I moved through the kitchen with mechanical precision, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, and plating food as if I were on autopilot. Jason sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone without a care in the world. Every now and then he would glance up, satisfied that his world remained undisturbed, that his control over me was absolute. He had no idea that something inside me had shifted, that I was no longer the woman he thought he had married. As I set his plate down in front of him, I studied him in a way I never had before. The man I had once loved, the man I had built my life around, was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. Jason hadn't changed overnight. I had simply been too blind to see him for what he truly was. I thought back to the early days, when he was charming, affectionate, and endlessly supportive. The way he used to surprise me with little gifts, how he once hung on to every word I said as if I were the most fascinating person in the world. I remembered how he used to tell me that I was destined for greatness, that I was too brilliant to ever settle for anything less than what I deserved. Somewhere along the way those words had stopped. First it was subtle. A casual remark here, a dismissive chuckle there. Comments about how I was too emotional when I brought up concerns. How I should be grateful that he worked so hard while I focused on building my career. Then came the real shifts, the discouragement disguised as concern. The way he always found a reason to dismiss my ambitions. Are you sure you want to work in that industry? It's really competitive. Maybe you should focus on home life for now. There's no rush. It's just one job interview. There will be others. But I had fought for this. I had held on to the belief that I could have both, love and success. I had been wrong. The moment that letter burned, it was as if Jason had taken off a mask he no longer needed. He didn't see me as his partner. He saw me as an extension of himself, as something he could control. As I sat across from him watching him eat, I realized something even more unsettling. Jason genuinely believed he was right. He didn't see what he had done as cruel or manipulative. In his mind, he had merely put me back in my place. The thought sent a chill down my spine. I picked at my own food, my appetite non-existent. How was work today? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Jason smirked, chewing lazily. Stressful. But that's what real responsibility feels like. He pointed his fork at me. Not that you'd understand. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. Right. Jason leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. I don't want you worrying about these things anymore. I take care of you, don't I? I nodded slowly, forcing myself to meet his gaze. You do. Exactly. He smirked. And that's why you don't need to work. A job wouldn't suit you anyway. You're too soft for that kind of thing. I gripped my fork tighter beneath the table. Soft. I used to think love meant compromise, that marriage meant putting someone else's happiness before my own. But sitting there listening to Jason justify his actions, I finally understood what I had been too afraid to admit. This wasn't love. Love doesn't diminish. It doesn't shrink. It doesn't burn dreams to ashes just to feed its own ego. Jason had spent years shaping me into something small, something manageable. And I had let him. Not anymore. I lifted my glass and took a slow sip of water, studying him over the rim. You're right, I said, keeping my voice calm. I don't need to work. You take care of everything. Jason smirked, pleased with himself. See? I knew you'd understand eventually. I smiled. And for the first time in a long time I felt powerful. Jason thought he had won. He thought I had surrendered. But he had no idea that I was already planning my escape. Not just from him. From the entire illusion of a marriage I had once believed in. The days that followed were a blur of carefully measured words and calculated silence. Jason carried on as if nothing had happened, as if burning my offer letter had been nothing more than a trivial decision, a natural extension of his authority. He believed that with enough time I would forget, that the anger in my eyes would fade, and I would settle back into the role he had carved out for me, silent, obedient, grateful. But I was no longer the woman he thought he had married. I had played along, nodding at his words, smiling at his remarks, making dinner just the way he liked. But inside I was unraveling every illusion, dismantling every piece of the life I had convinced myself was love. I was studying him the way a prisoner studies the lock on their cell door, because I knew I was going to escape. The only question was how. Jason controlled everything. Our finances, our home, even the way I spent my time. He had subtly ensured that I never had access to enough money to make independent choices. The joint account was only joint in name. My bank card worked only when he allowed it, and I had no savings of my own. Every time I had earned something, it had somehow found its way into his hands under the guise of responsible financial planning. I hadn't realized what he had been doing until it was too late. But what Jason didn't know was that I wasn't going to sit quietly in his carefully built cage. One night as he slept soundly beside me, his breath even and peaceful, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I needed a plan. Not just any plan, but one that ensured that when I left I wouldn't just walk away. I would make sure he felt the loss in every possible way. The next morning I played the part perfectly. I kissed him on the cheek before he left for work, waved from the door like the devoted wife he believed I was. The moment he was gone I got to work. I dug through every drawer, every cabinet, every folder Jason had ever kept locked away. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew Jason. He had secrets. He had things he would never want anyone to see. And if I was going to take back control, I needed leverage. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up, I found it. A folder tucked away in the back of his office drawer, filled with documents that made my stomach drop. Jason wasn't just controlling. He was deceitful. Hidden bank accounts. Unpaid debts. Business transactions that looked anything but legal. It was all there, neatly organized as if he had never considered that someone might look. I stared at the papers, my hands shaking. Jason had painted himself as the successful provider, the responsible husband who kept our home running smoothly. But in reality he was drowning in financial problems. And now I had the evidence. I took pictures of everything, emailing them to myself under a disguised address, ensuring they were backed up in multiple places. Then I carefully put everything back, making sure it looked undisturbed. Step 1 was complete. Now I needed to secure my freedom. I reached out to an old friend, someone I had lost touch with because Jason had made sure of it. The moment she picked up, I could feel the weight of my isolation. Mia? Her voice was cautious, uncertain. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Hey Emma. I know it's been a while, but I need your help. There was silence, then a sigh. Tell me everything. And I did. Emma didn't hesitate. She helped me set up a private account, one Jason couldn't access. She gave me contacts for legal advice, guiding me through the steps I would need to take to protect myself. Most importantly, she reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. I wasn't alone. But Jason couldn't suspect a thing. Not yet. That evening as he came home tossing his keys on the counter, I smiled at him like nothing had changed. I let him think he still had control. "You're in a good mood," he noted, narrowing his eyes slightly. I shrugged, setting dinner on the table. "Just happy to be home." He smirked as if my acceptance was inevitable. I sat across from him listening to him talk about his day, nodding in the right places, laughing at his jokes. And the entire time I was thinking about the folder hidden in his office, the money I had just transferred into my new account, the escape plan that was slowly falling into place. Jason thought he had won. But he had no idea that the moment he burned my dreams, he had unknowingly set fire to his own life. I was done being trapped. And soon he would know exactly what that meant. I continued the charade with unwavering precision. Every morning I kissed Jason goodbye, handed him his coffee and watched him walk out the door with the same smug confidence, believing he had tamed me. Every evening I played the devoted wife, setting the table with his favorite meals, nodding along to his self-important monologues about work and how men like him carried the world on their shoulders. He had no idea that while he was busy basking in his illusion of dominance, I was carefully, methodically unraveling everything he had built. It started small, subtle shifts that he wouldn't notice at first. I went through his files again, memorizing every detail, every transaction, every hidden expense. I found patterns, inconsistencies, and the makings of something bigger than simple financial mismanagement. Jason wasn't just bad with money. He had been covering up serious debts, ones that, if exposed, could ruin him completely. Then I started rerouting control. I used his arrogance against him, making casual comments about how overwhelming it must be to handle everything alone. I feigned helplessness, asking him to show me just in case something ever happened to him. He laughed, taking the bait, never once suspecting that each piece of information he handed me was another brick in the wall I was building around him. Behind the scenes, I was securing my future. I moved money in increments, just enough that he wouldn't notice. I contacted the bank, inquiring about accounts in my name, making sure that when the time came I could access what I needed. With Emma's help, I set up a secondary phone, one Jason didn't know existed, where I stored backups of every document, every recorded conversation that would ensure my protection. The final piece of the puzzle was his business. Jason prided himself on being untouchable, on keeping everything clean on paper. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized he had made mistakes. Ones that, with the right push, could become his undoing. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Jason scrolling through his phone, I leaned in and rested my head on his shoulder. He barely acknowledged me, too absorbed in whatever had his attention. "How's work?" I asked casually, keeping my voice light. He exhaled through his nose, scrolling past something before locking his phone. "Stressful as always. But that's what men do. We take on the weight of the world so people like you don't have to." I fought the urge to roll my eyes. "Must be exhausting." "It is," he muttered, rubbing his forehead. "But I handle it." I paused for a moment before tilting my head up, letting my voice soften. I was thinking, maybe I could help. Just little things, filing papers, organizing emails. I wouldn't want to overstep, but if it takes some pressure off you. Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "Sweetheart, you wouldn't even know where to start." I smiled, letting the condescension wash over me. "You're probably right." He patted my knee as if I were a child asking to play with grown-up toys. "You just focus on keeping things at home running smoothly. That's where you're needed." I let out a small, knowing laugh. Of course, Jason had no idea that while he dismissed me, I had already forwarded sensitive emails to my private account, had already memorized his most recent transactions, had already taken the first steps to ensure that when I made my move, he wouldn't see it coming. And then fate delivered the perfect opportunity. Jason had been out late for meetings, his usual routine whenever he needed to handle business. That night, as I cleaned up after dinner, his phone buzzed on the counter. Normally he kept it locked away from me, but in his rush that morning he had forgotten it. I hesitated only for a second before picking it up. A message lit up the screen. "Unknown number. The money still hasn't been transferred. If you don't handle it soon, there will be consequences." My heart pounded. I quickly noted down the number, my mind racing. Jason had never mentioned anything about missing payments, let alone consequences. Who was this person? And what exactly was he involved in? I placed the phone back where I found it, ensuring it looked untouched. Jason never shared details about his business, but this message told me everything I needed to know. He was hiding something much bigger than financial troubles. That night, as Jason climbed into bed beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing that I had just stumbled upon something that could accelerate my entire plan. The power balance in our marriage had shifted. Jason just didn't know it yet. I was no longer trapped in his world. He was trapped in mine. Lying in the darkness beside Jason, I could hear his steady breathing, the unbothered rhythm of a man who had no idea that the ground beneath him was beginning to crack. The message on his phone echoed in my mind, an urgent riddle waiting to be unraveled. I knew Jason had secrets, financial instability, shady deals, but this was different. Someone out there was waiting for money. Someone who wasn't willing to be patient. The next morning I played my part as usual, pouring his coffee, listening to his dismissive remarks, watching him walk out the door like he always did. The moment he was gone, I grabbed my spare phone and dialed the number I had copied from his messages. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I braced myself for anything. It rang twice before a voice answered. "You finally ready to handle your business?" The tone was sharp, impatient. I froze for a beat before responding, disguising my voice. "There's been a delay. We need more time." Pause. Then a low chuckle. "That's not how this works. He knows that." I swallowed, steadying myself. "Remind me again, what exactly is at stake here?" The voice hardened. "He didn't tell you?" Another silence, this one stretching with tension. Then the voice lowered. "I don't know who you are, but listen carefully. If Jason doesn't pay up soon, he's going to wish he had. And so will you." The call disconnected. My fingers trembled slightly as I lowered the phone. This wasn't just debt. Jason wasn't just struggling with money, he was tangled in something dangerous. And worse, whoever he owed was willing to involve me in the fallout. I wasn't scared. I was furious. Jason had spent years controlling me, making me feel small, dismissing my worth. And now, because of his reckless choices, I was being dragged into his mess. No. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for the storm to hit. I was going to make sure Jason was the only one who suffered the consequences. That afternoon, I met Emma at a quiet cafe. She took one look at my face and frowned. "You found something else, didn't you?" I nodded, sliding my phone across the table. She read the number, then the brief notes I had taken from the call. Her expression darkened. "This isn't just a late mortgage payment or unpaid credit card debt. This is something serious. I need to know exactly what he's into," I said. "And I need to know how to use it against him." Emma leaned back, crossing her arms. "If he's in trouble with the wrong people, confronting him might be dangerous." I shook my head. "I'm not going to confront him. I'm going to make sure they do." The plan formed quickly after that. I used everything I had gathered, emails, transactions, hidden accounts, to trace Jason's dealings. He had been borrowing money under false pretenses, moving funds between accounts to cover his tracks. But he had overplayed his hand. The people he owed weren't banks or credit agencies. They were individuals who operated outside the limits of legal consequences. And now they were closing in. I reached out to them again, this time with purpose. "I have information on Jason," I told them. "The kind that can ensure you get what you're owed." There was a pause. Then a simple response. "We're listening." That evening, Jason came home later than usual, irritation lining his features. I could tell something had shifted. He was nervous, distracted. He barely touched his dinner, his mind elsewhere. "What's wrong?" I asked, feigning concern. "Nothing," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "Work stuff." I reached across the table, resting my hand over his. "You work too hard," I murmured. "Maybe you should take a break. Clear your mind." Jason sighed, shaking his head. "You wouldn't understand." I smiled, hiding the satisfaction bubbling inside me. "Oh, but I did." The following morning, I made sure to be out of the house before Jason left for work. I had arranged everything perfectly. The people he owed would be waiting for him at his office. They had all the proof they needed to pressure him into a decision. He would either find a way to pay them back immediately or face consequences he couldn't manipulate his way out of. And I had already taken what I needed. By the time Jason realized what was happening, I would be long gone, taking with me everything he had once held over me. My financial independence, my security, my freedom. I wasn't just escaping. I was making sure that Jason had nothing left to hold on to. He had burned my dreams. Now I was setting fire to his entire world. I sat in a quiet cafe, the hum of distant conversations blending into the background as I scrolled through my phone. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from the sheer weight of the moment. Today was the day. The day everything Jason had built, his power, his control, his carefully curated facade, would collapse in on itself. And the best part? He wouldn't even see it coming. I took a slow sip of my coffee, glancing at the time. Jason would have just arrived at his office, where an unexpected reception awaited him. The people he had been avoiding, the ones he owed more than just money, were waiting. I had ensured that they had every piece of information they needed. His financial records, the hidden accounts, the fraudulent transactions. They knew exactly how much he had taken, where he had funneled it, and more importantly, how much he had left. Which, after my careful maneuvering, was next to nothing. Jason had always prided himself on being untouchable, on being the one in control. He had spent years making sure I felt small, ensuring that I was dependent on him. But as I sat there watching the minutes tick by, I knew that for the first time he was the one who had no way out. My phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. He knows now. Panic setting in. Your move. I exhaled slowly, a satisfied smile curling on my lips. Jason wasn't the type to show weakness, but I could imagine the scene unfolding in his office. His usual arrogance cracking as he realized the walls were closing in. The threats. The demands. The realization that his carefully spun web of control had unraveled completely. And I wasn't finished. While Jason was scrambling to fix the disaster at work, I had one last play to make. I left the cafe and headed home, our home, though it wouldn't be his for much longer. By now he would be too distracted to notice anything else, which gave me just enough time. I had spent the past few weeks preparing, slowly but deliberately removing my presence from his life. Important documents, sentimental belongings, anything that mattered to me, I had already secured elsewhere. The apartment we shared, the one he so proudly claimed as his, was now just a hollow space, stripped of anything that tied me to it. I moved through the rooms with precision, taking one last look at the place where I had spent years feeling like a prisoner. The kitchen where I had prepared meals while he took credit for providing. The bedroom where I had laid awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I had stopped recognizing the man beside me. A past life. When I was finally leaving behind, I left a single envelope on the counter. My final message to Jason. No drawn-out explanations, no desperate pleas, just a simple statement. You burned my dreams. Now I've burned your entire world. I'm not coming back. By the time Jason returned home, broken and defeated, I would be long gone. I didn't need to see his face to know what would happen next. The realization that his money was gone. That his power was slipping through his fingers. That the one person he had always thought would stay, the one he believed he had full control over, had orchestrated his downfall. I imagined him tearing through the house, searching for some kind of leverage, some way to regain control. Only to find nothing. No money. No security. No wife waiting for him with dinner and a quiet nod. Just an empty house and an even emptier future. For years Jason had dictated my life. Decided what I could and couldn't do. Stripped away my independence, my confidence, my belief in myself. But in the end he had never realized the truth. I was never weak. I was never powerless. I was simply waiting for the right moment. And now, as I stepped into the cab that would take me far away from everything I had once known, I realized something. Jason had tried to break me. But I had just destroyed him. As the cab pulled away from the home that had felt more like a prison, I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me there, nothing worth holding on to. The weight on my chest, the suffocating grip Jason had once had over my life, was gone. And for the first time in years I could breathe. The city lights blurred through the window as we sped away, my phone silent in my lap. No messages, no missed calls. Yet. Jason hadn't returned home yet. He was still trapped in his own nightmare, scrambling to keep his empire from crumbling. But soon he would step through that front door. He would see the empty space where my things used to be. He would find the letter I had left behind. And then the real fallout would begin. I leaned back against the seat, my heart still pounding despite the relief coursing through me. I had done it. I had walked away. But part of me still craved closure. The final confirmation that Jason understood, that he truly grasped what had happened to him. I didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, my phone vibrated violently against my palm. Jason's name flashed across the screen, his calls coming in rapid succession. I ignored them, watching as the number climbed, 5, 6, 7 missed calls in the span of a few minutes. Then the messages started. Where are you? You think you can just walk away? Come home. Now. This isn't funny, Mia. I let out a quiet breath, my fingers hovering over the screen. It was almost amusing watching him spiral. Jason had spent years making me feel powerless, convincing me that I had no way out. But now he was the one losing control. And he wasn't handling it well. The messages became more frantic, the threats slipping through between desperate pleas. He wanted answers. He wanted to know how I had done it, how I had outmaneuvered him. But most of all, he wanted to believe this wasn't real. I turned off my phone. The next few days were eerily quiet. I had expected Jason to show up at my doorstep, to try and pull me back into his world. But he didn't. Instead, the fallout was happening elsewhere. Emma called me late that evening, her voice laced with barely contained excitement. You need to check the news, she said. I frowned, grabbing the remote and flipping through channels until I found it. There, plastered across the screen, was Jason's face. Not in the polished, confident way he usually presented himself, but in the form of a headline that sent a thrill through my chest. Local businessman under investigation for financial fraud. I sat up straighter, my pulse quickening. The story unfolded before my eyes. Investigators had discovered irregularities in Jason's business dealings. Money that had been funneled through illegal channels. Debts that couldn't be accounted for. The very people I had tipped off had ensured that Jason wouldn't just be facing personal ruin. He was facing legal consequences. I watched as reporters detailed his downfall, piecing together the same information I had uncovered weeks ago. Jason's empire had been built on deception, and now, it was crumbling in front of everyone. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Jason. It was an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. A familiar voice greeted me on the other end. The same voice from the call I had made when I set everything into motion. You did well, the man said simply. I swallowed. He deserves worse. A low chuckle. Don't worry. He's going to get exactly what he deserves. The call ended and I sat there, the weight of everything sinking in. It was over. Truly over. Jason had lost everything. His money, his power, his reputation. And I was free. I stepped onto the balcony of my new apartment, feeling the crisp night air against my skin. The city stretched out before me, vast and full of possibilities. I had spent years believing I needed Jason. That without him I was nothing. But standing there looking at the world ahead of me, I realized the truth. Jason had never been my future. He was just a lesson I had finally learned. Standing on the balcony of my new apartment, I inhaled the crisp night air, feeling lighter than I had in years. Jason was finally paying the price for everything he had done, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't the one left picking up the pieces. His carefully built world was crumbling and I was the one who had struck the match. But even as I stood there relishing my freedom, I knew one thing for certain. Jason wouldn't go down quietly. I turned my phone back on after days of silence, expecting to see the wreckage of his rage laid out in missed calls and messages. And I wasn't disappointed. There were dozens. Some were angry, full of blame and demands. Others were desperate, pleading for me to come back to fix the mess he had made. But the last one made me pause. Meet me. One last time. You owe me that much. I owed him nothing. But I also knew Jason well enough to recognize what this was. He wasn't looking for closure. He was looking for control. And I was about to show him, one last time, that he had none. I chose the meeting place carefully. A public cafe, one where I would never feel cornered. I arrived early, positioning myself at a table near the window, my back against the wall so I could see him coming. When he finally walked in, I barely recognized him. The confident, self-assured man I had once married was gone. In his place was someone unsteady, his face tense, his clothes slightly disheveled. The consequences of his downfall were written all over him. He spotted me instantly and stalked over, dropping into the chair across from me. For a long moment he just stared as if trying to figure out how I had managed to slip through his grasp. Finally he exhaled sharply. You set me up. I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the silence stretch between us. I set myself free. His jaw clenched. You think you won? I met his gaze, unflinching. I know I did. Jason let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You destroyed my life. I arched a brow. You burned my offer letter. Told me I belonged in the kitchen. Took everything from me and expected me to thank you for it. Tell me, Jason, why do you get to ruin my dreams, but I'm not allowed to take back my own life? For the first time he didn't have an answer. Instead he leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. You have no idea what you've done. These people, they don't just go away. I tilted my head, pretending to consider his words. You're right. That's why I made sure they had everything they needed to take their problem directly to you. His fingers curled into fists on the table, his composure slipping. You don't understand what's at stake. I set my cup down with a quiet clink. No, Jason. You don't understand. I was never your pawn. You thought you had me trapped, but I was always 10 steps ahead. No. You're the one with nothing left. For the first time, real fear flashed in his eyes. Not fear for me, but fear of what came next for him. He opened his mouth, but I stood before he could speak. This is the last time we will ever speak, I said, my voice calm, certain. You don't own me anymore. And you never will again. I walked out of that cafe without looking back. Because Jason was my past. And I had a future to claim. As I stepped out of the cafe, the cold air hit my face, sharp and refreshing. I had done it. I had faced Jason one last time and walked away on my terms. The weight of years of manipulation and control had lifted, and in its place was something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. But I knew Jason. He wasn't the type to let go easily. He would fight, claw, and try to regain the control he had lost. But the beauty of his downfall was that it was already in motion, far beyond anything he could salvage. I took a deep breath and hailed a cab back to my apartment, my hands steady, my mind clear. Emma was waiting for me when I arrived, her expression a mix of relief and excitement. So, she asked, leaning forward on the couch. How did he take it? I smirked, sinking into the chair across from her. Exactly how we expected. Denial. Bigger. And then fear. She let out a low whistle. That's got to be a first for him. It is, I said, leaning back. And it won't be the last. I grabbed the remote and turned on the news, knowing what I was looking for. The story was already spreading like wildfire. Jason's financial scandal had become public knowledge, and the headlines were relentless. Businessman's fraud exposed. Authorities investigating missing funds. Former employees speak out against Jason Matthews' corrupt dealings. Could he face jail time? I watched with quiet satisfaction as the reporters detailed every one of Jason's mistakes. His company was in shambles. His reputation, once so carefully protected, was now being torn apart. And his allies? They were vanishing. Emma grinned. I still can't believe you pulled this off. I met her gaze. He underestimated me. That was his first mistake. As the news continued to unfold, my phone vibrated. Another unknown number. I didn't have to guess who it was. The people Jason owed weren't patient, and now that his financial misdeeds were in the open, their window for getting what they wanted was closing fast. I answered, keeping my voice steady. Yes. A deep voice responded, calm but firm. He's losing everything. Fast. We'll be collecting soon. I nodded, even though they couldn't see me. I figured as much. Pause. Then the voice softened, almost amused. You're colder than I expected. I exhaled slowly. I've learned from the best. The call ended and I set the phone down, my heart steady. Jason had spent years ensuring I had no power, no control. Now he was at the mercy of forces he couldn't manipulate. Emma raised an eyebrow. That them? Yeah. She leaned back, shaking her head in disbelief. Jason's really done for, isn't he? I smiled. Oh, he's only just beginning to realize it. And I was right. The next morning, the inevitable happened. Jason showed up at my apartment. I had expected it. I had even prepared for it. When the knock came, I didn't flinch. I simply stood, crossed the room, and opened the door. Jason stood there, looking nothing like the man I had once known. His eyes were wild, his clothes slightly wrinkled, his entire posture screaming desperation. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You look awful. He didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he stepped forward, his voice low, urgent. Mia, we need to talk. I tilted my head. About what? How you finally lost everything. How karma came knocking and you have nowhere to run. His jaw tightened. You think this is funny? I shrugged. I think it's overdue. Jason let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. I don't have time for this. His voice wavered slightly, the cracks beginning to show. You don't understand what's happening. Oh, I understand perfectly. I held his gaze, unwavering. I understand that you did this to yourself. I understand that you thought you could control everything and everyone, but you were wrong. He took another step closer. I just need time to fix this. To get things back on track. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because Jason truly believed there was a way out. That if he just tried hard enough, he could pull the strings and make it all disappear. But this time there was no escape. Jason, I said, my voice quiet but firm. There's nothing left to fix. He stared at me, realization dawning. For the first time he truly saw it. The finality in my eyes, the certainty in my stance. There was no going back. Not for me. Not for him. His shoulders sagged slightly. You really don't care, do you? I met his gaze, my voice steady. Not anymore. Jason swallowed, looking away for a moment. When he turned back, his expression had changed. The desperation was still there, but now there was something else. Resignation. Then I guess this is it, he said quietly. I nodded. It is. He hesitated as if wanting to say something else. But then, without another word, he turned and walked away. I watched him go, waiting until he disappeared down the street before closing the door behind me. Emma peeked out from the kitchen, her arms crossed. That was intense. I let out a breath, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of the moment. Yeah. She studied me for a moment before smiling. So, what now? I smiled back, feeling something new stir inside me. Now, I said, I start over. And this time I was doing it on my own terms. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in years I felt truly, completely alone. But it wasn't the kind of loneliness that came from isolation. It was freedom. A clean slate. The life I had been denied for so long was now mine to claim. No more second-guessing, no more waiting for permission, no more living in someone else's shadow. I took a deep breath, letting the silence settle around me like a warm embrace. Jason was gone, and with him the chains that had bound me to a life that was never meant to be mine. The city hummed outside my window, a reminder that the world was still moving, still full of opportunities waiting to be seized. And for the first time I wasn't afraid to reach for them. The next morning I woke up to sunlight streaming through my curtains, a stark contrast to the dim, suffocating space I had left behind. No heavy footsteps echoing down the hall, no cold voice demanding answers. Just peace. I stretched, savoring the feeling of waking up without the weight of someone else's expectations pressing down on me. Emma had already left for work, leaving a note on the kitchen counter. You did it. Now go live. I smiled to myself, pouring a cup of coffee as I scrolled through my emails. Among the usual clutter, one subject line stood out. Job offer reopening discussion. My breath caught in my throat. It was from the same company that had once given me an opportunity, before Jason had burned it to ashes. I opened the email, my fingers trembling slightly. Dear Mia, we understand that circumstances prevented you from joining us previously, but given your impressive qualifications, we'd love to reconsider you for the position. If you're still interested, let's set up a meeting. I set the phone down, my heart pounding. The universe had just handed me the very thing Jason had tried to steal from me. And this time no one was standing in my way. Without hesitation I typed my response. I'd love to meet. When are you available? The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. I updated my resume, gathered my portfolio, and stood in front of the mirror, practicing the confidence I now felt deep in my bones. I wasn't just proving something to them, I was proving it to myself. That I was capable. That I was enough. That I had never needed Jason or anyone else to define my worth. The next morning I stepped into the office building, my chin held high. The interview went smoothly, and as I walked out of the meeting room I already knew, I had it. I had taken back what was mine. Days turned into weeks, and soon my life no longer felt like something I had to escape from. It was something I was building, one choice at a time. My job, my apartment, my future. Every piece was mine, untainted by anyone else's control. One afternoon as I sat at a cafe flipping through a book, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. Breaking. Jason Matthews declares bankruptcy amid fraud investigation. I stared at the screen, rereading the words, letting them sink in. Jason, the man who had once believed himself untouchable, was now publicly unraveling. His assets were being seized, his associates had abandoned him, and the world was finally seeing him for what he truly was. I expected to feel triumphant, victorious. But instead I felt nothing. Jason no longer had a place in my life, not even as a memory of my revenge. He was just another part of my past, a lesson learned, a chapter closed. I locked my phone, took a sip of my coffee and smiled. Because I had won. Not because he had lost. But because I had finally chosen myself.